think there's just a lot of latent potential in MENA, specifically in that tech space, right? We think of, there's more than 100 million people under the age of 35. There'll be 700 million people living in the region by the end of the century. Very similar to maybe emerging markets like India and China. The value and the premium people place on education is very, very high.
Welcome back to Wise on Air, the show where we talk to the world's leading minds on the future of education. My name is Bassem and I'm the producer of the show. Today we're going to be talking about a region that is often overlooked in the global edtech landscape, the Middle East and North Africa, or commonly known as MENA. MENA is home to more than 400 million people with a young and tech-savvy population, a growing demand for quality education, and a huge potential for digital transformation. But despite these favorable conditions, MENA's edtech sector has been lagging behind other regions in terms of investment, innovation, and adoption. Why is that? And what are the opportunities and challenges for edtech entrepreneurs and investors in this region? To answer these questions, we speak to Nafid Al-Daqqaq, managing partner of BLDR Ventures. Nafid has had extensive experience studying, analyzing, and working in MENA's education sector, helping spearhead Idrak, an online learning platform that serves millions of learners across the Arab world. He's also served as a senior advisor at the Queen Rania Foundation for more than 6 years. And Nafid is also an avid writer on his blog, Nafid's Notes, where he discusses key trends in edtech and more. We thought his article, MENA, EdTech's Sleeping Giant, was really interesting, and I'd like to preface this episode by reading a few excerpts for you from the article itself. So here in the article, it says, MENA's demographics are ripe for edtech companies to break out. The population is a pyramid tilted toward youth that will continue to yield a growing number of students. UNESCO estimates that the region has up to 100 million school-age students. Egypt alone will add almost 1 million new students to its higher education system by the end of 2021. The total addressable market is significantly larger if we factor in the reskilling and upskilling of adult workers needed across MENA as a result of the fourth industrial revolution. Particularly relevant in the region where university degrees are often correlated with unemployment. In parallel, internet and smartphone penetration, as well as GDP per capita across MENA, affirm that innovations like affordable online learning are viable. Excluding Syria and Yemen, internet penetration in the Arabic-speaking Middle East is over 90%. Smartphone penetration in the region is among the highest globally at 97%. Critically, the willingness to adopt tech products is high. Many opinion polls show that MENA youth believe that the internet will play a vital role in their education going forward. So that's what it says there in that excerpt, which made us think, despite all those figures, why is it that MENA has yet to become a leading region in edtech development and adoption? Later in the article, Nafis details about how they spoke to more than 50 leading edtech startups and investors in the region, and they came to find that MENA's edtech ecosystem faces several key challenges related to market fragmentation, digital payments, and exits. Now, we encourage you to read this article in full, which can be found in the link in the description. And of course, stay tuned to hear straight from Nafid on this pressing topic, among many others in this episode. Now, let's jump to Wise director and host of this episode, Elias Filfoul, to kick off the conversation.
It's a great pleasure to be with you, Nafis.
Likewise.
Maybe if I start with the fact that we are in London and we're talking about the region, so today's session is really about MENA. I couldn't not think about the fact that while I was coming here, that talking about the region once again from the West. And it's almost reminded me a little bit that, that's what the colonizer have done.
100%.
Do we believe that we own a certain truth because we left our countries and now we look at it from a distance with some emotions?
I think it's a really important question to answer, and to ask and then answer. I think to your point, I think like some of the biggest problems in our region have really been about people from outside the region, giving lectures, pontificating, and just, being very prescriptive without spending time on the ground. So I think that's really something that's very important to think about. Something that I'm very, very conscious of as well. I think both of us have spent a lot of time in the region. I spent most of my life, most of my career in the region, but there's no way around it. The past, say, 5+ years have been really split between here and whether it's Jordan, Egypt, the UAE, Saudi, other parts of the world. So there's sort of, I think, I'm of two minds. In one way, sadly, London is the capital of the Middle East. Ironically, sometimes it's easier to meet other Arabs, other people from the region in London, than having, all of them meet in Saudi or Qatar. I think that's starting to change, and inshallah things will even get better. But there's a lot, I'd say, of, like I always tell people, like when I live in London, I don't feel like I'm that far away from the Arab world. Like it's not, you're always hearing Arabic. It's very, there was an interesting discussion there had around Brexit, but then making it visa free for everybody from the region to come here. But I think that there's no denying that if you really want to solve the problems on the ground, you need to invest. You need to, by being on the ground, invest with the people that are there day in, day out, especially in something like education, right? Like who are the people in the classroom, or the people operating within the system that are, struggling with it, that are innovating within it. So I think it's an interesting tension, but being sometimes a bit far removed also gives you that perspective and that vantage point. And if you want to do work, I'd say that's pan-regional, it's sometimes, ironically, I'd say easier to do it from a place like London or maybe even Paris. As long as, again, you're constantly still spending a good, healthy amount of time in the ground, in the trenches, with people that are solving the problems.
I actually, the first time I got to know about you was from a dear friend. Her name is Isabel Howe.
Yeah.
That's been doing some fantastic work in impact and early childhood education. And now she joined the accelerator at Stanford. And she told me, that you should get to know a little bit more what Nafis is doing. And so that's how the first time I heard about your work. And then I started reading some of the write-up you post. I want to get into the blog, specifically the blog you have, Nafis Notes. What is some of the objective you want to reach by writing your thinking and sharing your observations?
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly to start on a sort of personal level, that then maybe to go on a sort of societal level. Personally, I think, writing is really important because it helps you sort of structure your thoughts. There's a quote that I'm going to butcher, but that says, if you think you have a concrete thought, it's only true until you start writing it. And then you realize, I actually haven't thought this through. So I think in a nice way, writing forces you to structure your thinking very, very well. And the more I write about something, I think the better I can think about it, which is, I'd say, really the main goal for me. So it's a way for me to learn in public, think in public, put stuff out there, get feedback, get criticized on it, and sort of learn and grow. I think more of sort of maybe as a societal level, sort of there are two themes that I want to push, and I'm sure we'll touch on them. One is, I think, MENA's EdTech sleeping giant, so trying to highlight as many of that as possible. And that may be primarily relevant to the MENA region, but also relevant to other emerging markets. The second point is what I call, and what other people may also call, pedagogy-first approach to education. I think, technology can be really, really powerful, but the risk and the mistake that we keep falling back into is assuming, okay, this technology is going to be a silver bullet that's going to fix all problems. It really, and one of my theses, talks about, it's the Game Boy, welcome to London, not the metaverse. And the Game Boy is a very, very interesting example, right? Because when Nintendo launched the Game Boy, and it's probably like one of the, I think it's like the third or fourth most successful console of all time, it was all sort of very old, withered technology that just changed how people played. And that's kind of what you want to do with learning. It doesn't matter if you're using Apple Vision or if you're using, a chalkboard. How are you actually changing how people learn? How are you changing the dynamic and the relationships within the classroom? So I'd say that pedagogy-first approach and mindset is kind of what I'm trying to put forward.
And this is among the biggest challenges you see in the region.
Oh, for sure.
We don't have consistent pedagogies, and are we catching up on a minimum benchmark that?
I think the problem in the region sometimes it's hard to sort of generalize and paint with a broad brush, but I'd say generally speaking, we've been good because, and certainly maybe places like the GCC, because the funding is there, you can always get the latest tech.
Yeah.
But the tech doesn't matter if you're not necessarily changing what's happening in the classroom.
Yeah.
This whole idea, again, is like the very old, but true maxim, like the quality of any education system cannot exceed the quality of its teachers.
Yeah.
But it's easier to go for the red ribbon moments. It's easier to, take a picture of all the teachers with iPads or all the teachers now with like Apple Vision goggles. But a teacher before and after training looks exactly the same. So it's not as easy to sort of take a picture of them and sort of announce it. But again, I'd say like there are certainly, pockets of excellence differ from country to country. But I'd say generally speaking, if you look at PISA, you look at TIMSS, you look at any maybe international assessment out there, it's very clear. We're not, even our sort of top private schools are sort of not as close as they need to be to the global average.
You strike at two questions. I just want to focus on the gameful design as a solution that needs to be adopted in the learning pedagogy. Explain a little bit more this concept.
Yeah. I think it's something that I'd say I'm still thinking about. There are people that have spent a lot of time thinking about this as well that have inspired me to think about it more. So obviously, Seymour Papert at MIT talked a lot about this whole idea of hard fun. And then that's really what people want. They want to enjoy a challenge. And people don't want learning to be easy. And the goal shouldn't be to make learning easy. The goal is how do you make the difficulty, the desirable difficulty, enjoyable. And I'd say the best example out there, or at least one of the best, is games. Some of these games are really, really hard. They take a lot of time for you to learn them, master them, etc. And a leading thinker in this space is James Gee at Arizona State University, if I'm not mistaken. He has this really, really great analogy where he says, in games, you play the game and then only go to the manual if something was unclear. In school, we teach you the manual and we get you memorize it, but you might never play the game. So for me, the question is, how can we bridge that divide as much as possible? Again, there are a lot of levers in there. There's an interesting work done by Valerie Shute at the University of Florida around what her and one of her professors, Saeed Ahmed, talks about stealth assessments, which is in a game, you're all constantly being assessed. You need to defeat the boss, you need to go to the next level, and it's kind of part of playing. You don't stop and say, okay, now let me sit and take a test. So how much closer can we get education to that?
How is it linked to incentives or motivation? Or because for example, we do have a massive challenge when it comes to retention, and this is not only in MENA, this is across the world. Do you feel that this kind of gameful type of design implemented in pedagogies are a good incentives, a good motivation element, a good retention element?
Yeah, I mean, so have an entire piece just, I'd say, on motivation. This whole idea, right, we talk about, learning isn't the filling of a pail, it's the lighting of a fire. It's when somebody is excited about something they want to learn about, it's almost impossible to stop them learning. They'll just go down that rabbit hole. Versus when somebody isn't as excited about something, it's really, really hard. You need to push them. So creating this pull, I think games are very, very good at that. But there's a lot of, science on this, self-determination theory, the 4 C's of intrinsic motivation. I think there's a lot there that we need to think about a lot more when we think about learning. In general, our, I'd say, approach has been, this is going to be on the exam, so you need to study it. You need to, that's just not motivating. For most people. You really need to figure out how do you make this exciting for them, and that makes it very hard. And goes to my previous points, are we equipping our teachers to do that? There's a saying in Arabic, right? فَقَدُ الشَّيْء لَا يُعْطِيهِ. If we haven't equipped our teachers, if we haven't motivated our teachers, if we haven't paid them enough, are they going to be able to transfer that light?
And we're not. I mean, the region is not paying.
The region is not. Again,
even if I take the Tunisian case, back in when we got our independence, teacher payment was very high, and actually you need to do a specific test to become a teacher. It was an important role you play in a society. In the more recent reforms, basically the dropouts go to become teachers, and that's a policy.
Well, 100%. I mean, I think, I also spent a lot of time working in Jordan, talk about that. In Jordan, the route to become a teacher could just be really, really cool. Right now, it's just to take a number for the Civil Service Bureau, and you basically just wait your turn. It needs to be, it's not as rigorous as it should be. And you by design, it's a lot of what I talk about, and without some getting too sort of polemical about this, but it's failure by design. But it's also because, what are the other incentives within the system? We have an unemployment problem. And I think, there was a minister of education in Jordan that said, the prime minister needs to decide, am I trying to help them solve unemployment, or am I reforming education? Because I cannot do both at the same time. Because if we continue to see the ministries of education as, anybody can become a teacher, they can absorb more administrators, then, again, maybe I'm bringing down unemployment. But in the long term, I'm not really solving my education reform challenges. But I would just want to add, again, it's not just in the region, right? Teacher retention, teacher pay, teacher.
It's a challenge across the world.
In this country, in the UK, in the US,
it's across the world. I mean, probably in the West, even it's gonna get even more serious in the next few years because of the Asian population, because of.
And the only place, Singapore, which is a city state, is probably one of the only places in the world that struggles. But again, and that's the other problem, with what does Singapore do? Singapore is a tiny city state, very, very different history, story, national identity. you can't take all what Singapore's doing. Let's try to do it in Qatar and do it. It's just very, very different. So I'm just saying, like, this is not about, self-flagellation, saying, oh, the region. This is a global problem, but again, our experiences are where we come from, what we've seen.
I was privileged enough to spend time in Singapore, and even the Singaporeans themselves, they didn't believe where they reached.
Really?
I mean, yeah, I did my master at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, and during my 2 years, we had the most amazing privilege to meet Mr. Lee Kuan Yew himself, because he was very old back then.
Yeah.
The first year we met him, he was just given a lecture to the 65 students as a special lecturer, or because he was a minister mentor, and the only thing actually he gave his name to as a legacy was to the school. He did not want to give his name to a street, to an airport. That's the only thing his entourage managed to convince him. I'm just mentioning Singapore, and they started with education.
Yeah.
They took the best brain when they got the independence, and then when Malaysia kicked them out of the union, they had this. And the massive investment happened at the education, and teachers are well paid in Singapore.
Yeah.
Now, probably they have shortages because of all the same issues, right? We can get back to these topics.
Yeah.
I want to just do a little personal journey of yours. I just want the audience to understand, where did you start? Because my next question will be, why did you chose to be in this field? And I feel folks who go to education or health are the idealists. I just want to understand the journey. Where did you study? And what was some of the aspiration in the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, like, sometimes people think this is a bit corny, but like, this is really, like, for me, there's big fan of Arabic literature, Arabic poetry, and then there's this sort of one line of poetry that, like I heard, I think in grade 8, which is "Ummati allaki bayna al-umami minbarun lis-sayfi aw lil-qalam." And I kind of, like, as a 14-year-old, I saw Omar Aburish's line, kind of asked myself, like, and again, this is far away from, okay, let's go back to the golden age. Just like right now, where's that platform? Who's doing an incredible job? Now, I was sort of born in Saudi, grew up in Palestine, but at this point was sort of doing high school in the UAE. And like, I'd say, like, obviously the UAE has been sort of Dubai specifically, maybe, as a journey, just very, very interesting to see how inspiring, how quickly things have moved. But then, when I got to university, I started thinking, like, I would have been the one that does all this with the platform. And I think that's where I quickly, and maybe naively first on, it's education. If I can get as many. And
so you started early, the thinking about being involved in the field.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say when I went to Yale for undergrad, and I was pre-med, the idea was that I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. But then my first year of sort of pre-med, I was studying cognitive science. I was like, my impact at best is going to be, one patient at a time. I'm very fascinated by the brain. I've always been, like, passionate about medicine, so that's when I realized I'm not going to change the Arab world if I become a neurosurgeon. I'm not sure I'm changing anything now, but at least back in university, listening to Al-Hilm Al-Arabi on YouTube, before Spotify, and they're like, oh yeah, how am I going to do this? So that's when I pivoted, started to do economics because I wanted to understand macroeconomics. And then Yale had this program called the World Fellows Program, where they brought, I'd say, inspiring leaders from around the world. And I was lucky enough to be the World Fellow Liaison to Muna Abu Sleiman, Saudi, I'd say, entrepreneur, founder. And she gave me this book called Generation in Waiting. And it talked about, the unemployment challenges and all the different things in the region. That's when, like, okay, it has to be education. So that pushed me, I'd say, to then do my undergraduate thesis on curriculum reform in the region. So I looked at comparatively the UAE and Jordan, what is stopping the curriculum reform. And then from there, I'd say, went did strategy consulting in education, moved to work for the Queen Rania Foundation in Jordan. And I think there is where the first time my full question was like, what is the platform we're creating for the Arab world? Was very lucky to get the opportunity at the Queen Rania Foundation to venture build Idrak, which is an online learning platform. Today it's 7 million learners. But there was, this was, I'd say, very, very unique.
It's probably among the first, can we call it?
It's a MOOC platform.
Yeah. Completely made by the region, for the region.
Yeah, I think, so we were in Davos in 2012, but committee, Anat Agrawal from edX, Daphne Koller from Coursera at the time, Sebastian Thrun at Udacity, and I was like super excited. I was like, how are we going to bring this to the region? And I think QR, the Queen Rania Foundation and Her Majesty specifically, were very excited about the idea, very visionary about it. And 2013, there was this question like, will they come? Will people even come to sort of the platform? Obviously, like, completely, I'd say, exceeded our expectations.
Yeah.
It was incredibly Fortunate and lucky. So did that for about 5 years, and then moved with the foundation here in London to help us work on fundraising for Idrak and sort of other efforts. So this was probably like like early 2017, and since then I'd say been back and forth. But then post-pandemic, I started reflecting on what do I want to do? How do I have more of a role? What's the next? Okay, we built Idrak. What's the next platform we want to create? So took a break, did my master's at Harvard in educational neuroscience, and then came back and just reconnected with a few friends that helped with Idrak at the time. We ended up launching Builder, which is a venture builder focused on, I'd say, the learn to earn cycle in the region. How do we create other platforms that specifically tackle learning and earning in the MENA region?
Yeah, yeah. And so right now with Builder, it's a fund, but it's more than a fund in a sense of you're really involved. So you're not gonna invest in a smaller number of company that you truly believe in, and you're gonna put a percentage of your time to make sure it takes off.
Yeah, I'd say we're kind of this mixture between operator and investor. We're kind of like a professional co-founder. So depending on sort of where in the founder's journey we start, I'd say in some instances, we start from zero. We identify the problem, start ideating around it, validating solutions, and then attract the founder. And I say that's probably the hardest way to build a company. But usually, a founder will come to us aligned around one of the themes we care about and learn to earn. And we'll start building with them around, okay, what could this look like? And then we come in as kind of like a Swiss Army co-founder. We have the engineering, the design, the product. And usually I'd say write the first check into the company. So invest between $100,000 to $150,000 and then help them.
So very much YC type of.
Exactly. I'd say just a lot more. But I mean, speaking of YC, one of the things we're looking at now, and I think you and I talked about it a bit, is there opportunity in the region for a pre-seed EdTech accelerator?
Yeah.
That is kind of like YC for education.
Yeah, my answer is we need patient capital.
Yeah.
We need a lot of patient capital. Is it reasonable and realistic that you're trying to cover MENA? Because MENA is a big region.
Yeah.
And MENA has different challenges, different historical background, different languages. Yes, Al-Arabi al-Fusha unites are all, but there's from North Africa to GCC to the Levant, and then you also have, unfortunately, a sad story of countries that are going through conflict. Is it just a brand to say MENA, or
it's a great
challenging you a little bit?
No. I love it. I think it's a great question. I think it's certainly a challenge to only do MENA, or to say MENA, because, like you said, like different countries have sort of different characteristics, different needs. I think, again, something I wrote about, we talked about this whole idea of like a MENA 1, a MENA 2, a MENA 3.
Explain that to the
I
love it.
I mean, I think, again, like if you take sort of purely the economic, GDP per capita data, and you kind of like segment the region, you end up with kind of sort of three. And again, this is a high level, I say very coarse classification of, kind of like the GDP per capita of France. And that's also on, 45 million people in the region. These people are, I'd say, highly westernized, sort of English first or French first. And these are people where, if you've achieved product market fit in Europe, you can probably, try to think about product market fit in a place in MENA 1. And again, this is across countries. This isn't, Saudi versus Egypt. This is, a certain segment of the population in Saudi, a certain segment of the population in Egypt, in Tunisia, etc. And then MENA 2, it's closer to GDP per capita of Indonesia. It's maybe a big part of the region. And those are people that are maybe Arabic first, but the kids are, I'd say, speak English, very exposed to English. And then MENA 3, which is the majority of the region, are people that are almost exclusively Arabic. And that gets to closer maybe the GDP per capita of places like, Pakistan or something like that. And then, if you have GDP product market fit, obviously keeping in mind sort of the linguistic maybe sort of adaptation and sort of translation in Pakistan, you could get it with sort of MENA 3. So it sort of really depends sort of how you think about it. But I will say a lot of shared challenges. But again, one of the things we could also talk about is the cross-border registration is sort of very difficult. But the problem is, like, none of our markets alone are sort of big enough to only build for Saudi, you could try to build maybe, for example, only for Egypt. But if you really want it to be a global company, we need to be building for Saudi, for Egypt, for Jordan, Morocco, or Tunisia. You want to build something that's pan-regional.
Yeah.
And sort of then use that to sort of, and again, I think, one of the things I think maybe in your interview with Sam so came up is, why would you only build a company for MENA and we build a company for the globe?
Yeah.
But I think the way you start with that is like local market, regional market, and again, obviously there are different theses around build for the US from day one, and a lot of people try to do that. Some of them succeed.
Yeah.
But I'm bullish about the people that are building for MENA, excited about building across MENA.
Okay, in a sense, you can also at some point rely on local partnership to navigate the regulatory environment that is different in each region. You write a lot about another interesting concept, which is our region as a sleeping giant. I spent a bit of time in Southeast Asia. As I mentioned, I studied in Singapore. I backpacked in all Southeast Asia. I was really curious to understand what's happening in China, so I lived in China back in 2012. And that was a real giant. And the giant has waken up.
Big time.
and the giant has creating a bit of for the West at least, a bit of tension. And I really hope that they get to talk to each other, because I think that there's much more we can lose if they get into. But going back to our region, there's also another giant, India. Also, we see beautiful progress. Is the giant concept in our region, I want to believe we do have giant, because we have amazing people who get out of our countries and make it to a level of contribution that is just global, right?
Yeah.
What is the concept, and how do you see this?
Yeah.
And how do we really unlock the promises of such a concept in our region?
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think the concept is pretty simple, right? I think there's just a lot of latent potential in MENA, specifically in that tech space, right? We think of, there's more than 100 million people under the age of 35. There'll be 700 million people living in the region by the end of the century.
700 million by 2000.
Yeah, so it's going to be a sizable market. And there's a huge, and you will know this as well, right? Like demand, like very similar to maybe emerging markets like India and China, the value and the premium people place on education is very, very high. Right? Like people will go into debt, they'll sell the house, they'll do anything just for their kids to learn.
Yeah.
And the demand is there. So just the access and the supply of edtech and education just hasn't been sort of equally distributed, hasn't been at the same level of quality. Look at Egypt, like with tutoring market in Egypt alone is like over $1 billion a year. That's just private tutoring. And obviously there are a lot of startups trying to capture that. You take that across the region. So I think there's a lot of latent potential there that's just waiting to be unlocked. I think for it to be unlocked, it's certainly not deterministic, right? It's not that it will be. I mean, I believe it will be, and I hope it will be, and I want to be part of the force that changes and sort of leads to that. But there are also certain scenarios where we miss on this sort of opportunity. And I think it comes down to a few things. One is, from a policy and regulatory perspective, like any other maybe sort of nascent startup ecosystem, what's the enabling regulations? How easy are you making for people to, start a company in Egypt, build and sell to Saudi and vice versa? And I think, those are really, Saudi Arabian market are the pillars of, like if those markets open up on each other, then it becomes easier to then open to secondary sort of markets across the region, even build, I'd say, for either like sub-Saharan Africa, the subcontinent. And I think, in a very interesting way, you could build globally relevant companies for that kind of global south based in the region. That's kind of, I'd say, our vision with builders. Can you build global companies from Riyadh to the world, from Doha to the world, from Abu Dhabi to the world? And there's no reason you can't, as long as sort of the regulators, and they're clearly very excited about this. So I say, one, getting the regulators in the policy, which will hopefully then trickle down to creating more and more talent density. And then the talent density is people already in the region, people coming to the region. And I think you're seeing more and more of that happen, certainly post-COVID. And the last thing I'd say, at least from an edtech perspective, just to bring this to the end of the conversation, it has to be pedagogy first. I think the kind of lazier temptation is, the metaverse is now hot. Are we building universities in the metaverse? Oh, now we're teaching, like your entire education is going to be on the blockchain. Why?
Yeah.
I can see maybe a few helpful use cases, but is that the real feature?
Yeah.
Oh, now ChatGPT is there. We're going to use LLMs to solve. And again, very powerful technology, but what are you doing with it? And also we can sort of talk more about that.
See, when you mention all of us dreams is to see an exceptional startup coming. We have few examples from the region that has to basically get out to reach its full potential. I'm Tunisian. I'm thinking about one Tunisian company, and Stadip, I think.
Stadip, it was
basically needed to get out of Tunis because there's no way he would have been able to attract the level of money he managed to attract, and then the exit and all that. And it's a big loss for the country and the region, because in terms of return, in terms of the economy that would have created, although you still have those founders with an amazing capacity to keep a level of the team locally based. And there's another company, I know very well, Yahya Go My Code, who needed to get out of Tunis to expand in Africa. And I'm following also the work of Abwab,
Yeah, in Jordan.
in Jordan, Hamdi. Yeah, the guy left Uber
Yeah.
and he went to do something impactful
Yeah.
in education. So do you see other?
I think to your point, I mean, I think unfortunately sometimes there's this kind of region, and we're here in London, to kind of do things from outside to sort of impact inside. Just the regulatory space is better. There's also, I would say, kind of this inferiority complex where even like, whether it's sovereign wealth funds, well, they prefer to invest in an Arab founder based abroad. To be fair, I mean, I'm sure there are things from a financial perspective where you want to diversify, so you can't just invest in the region. But yeah, I mean, I think, if we kind of like just going across the region, just thinking, starting from, I mean, I think Anab, Dr. Munir Jamjoom, incredible company, incredible founder, sort of superstar, smart, focused on the problem we started with, which is more teacher training and sort of teacher quality. Noon Academy is another company which actually relocated here to London, started in Saudi, expanded to Egypt, solving sort of a really, really important problem. Then, like say, we have Abwab with Hamdi, sort of the team. Obviously, have, Orcas in Egypt, Al Mentor as well. I guess now they're sort of in the UAE, but initially sort of, an Egyptian company, Go My Code, sort of Tunisia. You can like...
We work with also an amazing company in Saudi, Yenmo, which focus on the kids of disability, which is a big topic, at least, something locally
super important.
created that is. But so basically, they leave because the regulatory environment is not allowing the scale. Essentially, because the operation is still there, right? The implementation of the solution is still in our region.
I mean, I'd say, again, this is just my perspective. I don't know how accurate it is in the thesis I'm developing, but one, it's regulatory environment. Like it's sometimes easier to operate sort of a business across a region from London because you can then access sort of all the markets. The whole deal is sort of a UK company, makes it easier. So and this is not an ethic, but it's certainly a future of work company. I think of Hasub. I don't know if you've come across it. They run the largest freelancer platform for Arabic-speaking workers, which is called Mustaqim. Incredible company. I mean, the founder is a really good friend, so I'm obviously biased.
Out of Jordan as well?
No, they're two Syrian brothers based in Glasgow.
Oh, wow. And they want to employ folks in the region or bring them to the...
They're already employed, so they...
Oh, wow. So creating remote opportunities.
Managing remote opportunities. I'm not sure what their latest numbers are, but it's millions of sort of users on the platform. And sort of under the Hasub umbrella, they have multiple sort of... So I think Mustaqil is very similar to Upwork. Khamsat is literally like Fiverr. Ba'id is kind of like an Odesk. And they have, millions of sort of learners on these, or not workers, sorry. And I don't know. I mean, I assume their GMV is also in the millions. And again, two Syrian brothers based in Glasgow. The entire team is remote. I think their head of engineering is in Egypt. Their head of customer service is in Morocco.
Wow.
Also somebody...
That's what we love to hear, by the way, at Wise. We would love to amplify the voices of these founders.
Again, and completely bootstrapped.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure,
They have
who's gonna invest?
They have not taken any external investment, completely bootstrapped. And now it's like, this is a very successful company.
Bravo. Yeah.
MashaAllah. So, I mean, I think it's just sometimes easier to operate from here, especially if you're going for a regional pan-Arab play. The second thing to be is the density, right? Like this whole education reform, talent density is a chicken and egg problem. We want to fix the education system, reform education system to create more, I'd say, talented people to hire. So it's a bit you're solving the problem you're also facing. And the last one I'd say is ironically access to capital. When you think about, the number of VC funds that invest in MENA companies versus the number of VC capital that invest in US companies, European companies, Indian companies, it's just sometimes, I'd say it's almost always easier to fundraise if you're a UK-based company than if you're I don't know, Riyadh or Abu Dhabi-based company. Again, it's starting to change.
Techstars, for example, apparently any investment in Africa, they ask the founders to relocate to Canada. So they have a deal with the Canadian government, to allow kind of fast track.
Yeah, I mean, YC, right? Like the first thing they ask you to do is to set up a C Corp in Delaware, and that then needs to be the holdco.
Yeah.
And again, part of this is, about confidence in rule of law, legal system.
Yeah.
And again, it's things that probably like QFC, ADGM, DIFC in the region are starting to change. But, I mean, investors still prefer a Cayman company or something, that's governed by the UK law as opposed to, I don't know, some insert country, local law in our region.
So where do you see the future trends for EdTech in MENA region? And are they distinctive from Western counterpart, or are they simply playing catching up. And I want to just create a. I want to also give you a concept, which part of me admired what happened in Asia and Southeast Asia, because I believe they created a healthy balance between modernization and westernization, which I believe we have not yet reached that harmony in the Arab world.
100%.
So, friend of EdTech, are we catching up? And what is your thought on the modernization, westernization, and can we modernize without westernization in our region?
I mean, I think so. I'll start with that last one, and I think the answer is emphatically yes. I think, I still remember I've been to China, but for me, and in South Korea, but for me, I think the biggest realization for this was going to Japan for the first time, right? Like, you meet a country and a culture that's certainly impacted by the West, like anywhere else in the world, but it's very proudly and clearly Japanese. This whole idea that modernity doesn't have to be a Western concept, that modernity has always been Japanese, are very proud, they want to do things the Japanese way. I think the closest thing we have that in our region is maybe Turkey.
Yeah.
Potentially Iran, again, depending on sort of how that goes and sort of where that goes, but again, very complicated country, of course. But yeah, in the Arab world, we have this kind of inferiority complex, Uqdat al-Khawaja, where like, if it comes from somebody
blue eyes, he told the truth.
It must be true. But the other guy who's on the ground, it's called Nafez or Ahmad. I know, like he can't be correct because he doesn't speak, because he speaks English with an accent, or French with an accent or whatever it is. So I think huge problem. I mean, I think staying in Qatar, Tamim Barghouti has an incredible video on AJ Plus called Martin Luther for Istanbul. And he talks about this whole idea of Martin Luther when he reformed sort of the Protestant Reformation. If he had been living in Istanbul, which was the capital of sort of modernity at the time, he would have been a lot less successful if sort of reforming Christianity. True modernity and reform will only come from, like, has to be bottoms up. It's a very hard, almost impossible to do top down. Again, like, I'm not saying top down will always fail. I think it has a role to play. Ataturk, Lee Kuan Yew. But again, it needs to be really grounded with that culture. So to your question, I mean, I think, again, we're part of the world. We have the same problems that the rest of the world has. Teacher quality, access to sort of good educational resources and all of that. So I think some of the trends will be the same. And I think, COVID globally, brought a lot of that demand forward, did more to sort of normalize. I always say, like, there's no more, like, there was a snow day or a rain day. It doesn't happen anymore because we know everybody can just log in and try to learn online or at least get something online. But I do think there are certain parts of the equation that are going to be relevant only to our region. So to your point, so Arabic is the glossic language. And we need to be very cognizant and conscious of that. When you teach literacy, you're effectively, and obviously spend a lot of time thinking and writing about this, and I think it's one of the most important problems in our region, the distance or the dialectical distance between modern standing Arabic and the local dialect. And if we continue to deny that and sort of kind of like this ostrich head in the sand strategy that, like, okay, the Quran is sacred, but that doesn't mean the Arabic language is sacred. They're two different things. And the only way to preserve the Arabic language is actually teach people the Arabic language. This whole idea, like, I think Austrian musician Mahler talks about this, right? Like, preserving tradition is the passing of the fire, not holding on to the ashes. So I think that is, a very unique thing to our region. Obviously, again, we're not the only glossic language. The Greeks have dealt with this. The Chinese had something to deal with, but we just need to deal with it properly. Obviously, I think we have a lot of conflict, as you said, unfortunately, in our region. So thinking about how do you guarantee access to education, sort of low-resourced environments, it's going to be sort of super helpful, super critical, super important. And then, like, a few things that I'd say are only probably super important to us as the MENA region. And, the way we train our teachers is going to be different in the way teachers are trained in Singapore, because they also have to deal with different variables in the classroom.
I also believe in the idea that, the great idea exists out there. The Singaporean model, by the way, is like copy but adapt. It's not stupid to copy, but it's stupid to copy and not adapt.
Again, a lot of the city-states across the GCC, taking great lessons from Singapore that work. There's also stuff that hasn't worked. I'd say education is probably the space sort of really has.
It's a movement to move. It's a big thing to move. It's so hard to move.
I think it's a systems approach.
Do you think now that we were talking about it's so hard to reform education, do you believe we are at a stage where we're getting a new technology AI. There's a lot of buzz around it right now, and I think it's just important we cover we cover the question. Do you think we are heading into a complete new world? This is the new internet, and with AI, for example, leapfrog the reform not by intention but by obligation?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Sam Altman was a very, very smart guy.
I'll get you to Sam Altman.
Yeah.
I'm starting soft. We'll just
But the thing he told you, right, like when we were talking to him, is that don't believe anybody that's trying to predict anything about AI in the next 30 years. These guys have always been wrong.
yeah.
So what I will say is, I think the most important thing that things like ChatGPT and other large language models have shown us is the education system was already broken. Now we just have to fix it. And the fact that like ChatGPT didn't break education. ChatGPT showed us that the broken stuff that we're like, oh no, we can live with this, doesn't work anymore. Like asking kids to regurgitate information, being very happy with surface level knowledge, not going deep, not thinking deeply about sort of student motivation. That doesn't work anymore because now the barrier and access to cheating was like much easier, but that's a good thing. That means now as an education system, as educators, we need to think about how do we create better assessments, how to create more meaningful learning, because people could always cheat. Now it's just a lot easier and harder to detect. So how do you come up with project-based learning and game-based or gameful approaches to pedagogy that say, people aren't intrinsically motivated to this? Because now with ChatGPT, you can give them like scaffolding to take on, the identities of like a scientist, an astronaut, etc. You can abstract a lot of that complexity. And then I think, for me, people are very excited about, okay, how do I get ChatGPT to be somebody's tutor? I'm more excited about how to use ChatGPT to make children's thinking visible. And by that I mean, because when you get a child to teach something, you can see exactly where is their thinking breaking down. So if obviously, huge Pokemon fan, don't have to do that anymore. But I'm not excited about do we give every person their personal tutor? Do we give each one of them a Pokemon to teach?
Yeah.
And then you can see how okay, these are the breakdowns in the thinking. Your Pokemon can't learn how to add because you're missing this part of the number sense. And I think that's the more exciting part. But having said all that, at the end of the day, it's culture, it's the system. There's a lot about the grammar of schooling. And Larry Cuban at Stanford, and a lot of people have talked about this, that is just much more important than the technology.
Of course, because you won't be able, you could have the best technology, but if you don't have motivated people to use it, then we're
if you're still asking memorization questions on the Tawjihi, it doesn't matter. I remember when I did my undergraduate thesis, I went to the Jubilee School in Jordan and I interviewed the math teacher there. This is probably 2009, long time ago. And he was telling me, that one of the saddest things about his job is obviously at the school there are kids that could do IB, I think GCSEs, and kids that have to do the Tawjih. And these are usually the kids from maybe lower socioeconomic backgrounds because that's what the parents wanted. And he's like, we spend 10 years teaching these kids to think critically, think outside the box. This is a school for, the gifted. We have all the resources. They get the grade 10 and I tell them, forget all of that.
It's just,
forget it. For the next 3 years, I want you to memorize math. Because if you solve the question, even if you got the right answer, if you solve it incorrectly, you're going to be penalized. So the only way to do this is to memorize exactly. And again, so it doesn't matter what technology. If that incentive, if we're still testing memorization, kids are going to memorize.
I wanna go back to Sam Altman. He claims few things. I want to get to reaction, and I will start with the math thing. And he did a good comparison with the calculator, and we created calculus. That was, I think, 3x the amount of increase in terms of what we were able to do. And now with this new tool, he basically projects that we're gonna be 20 to 30x doing it. Where are we going with that? What's your reaction on that? By the way, I genuinely enjoyed that conversation with him. I believe that he seems to be genuine. He seems to be on a world tour to raise awareness, to talk to the regulator, to and to say, look, guys, we unleashed something. Even me as an innovator, I don't know where this is going, but we need to talk together because this is going somewhere big.
Yeah, I think it's hard to paint broad brush. So I think if we look at this from the education, so then pre-K early years, K to 12, and then higher ed and potentially adult economy. I can see what Sam is saying, primarily affecting adult learning and sort of higher ed, university education, just because those are sort of where now you can really push the technology to sort of its limits. So Ethan Mollick, professor at I think University of Pennsylvania, when ChatGPT launched, the first thing he did is now it's required on his, when you complete an assignment for his course, the assumption is you're going to use some sort of large language model,
Wow.
which means now he's asking you to do so much more
Wow.
because you can go and say, and again, so
And that's creativity basically. And what else you cannot trick the machine right now. It's the idea basically.
yeah, it's like now your creativity, right?
Yeah.
You can do so much more. Now he
Yeah.
ask what he couldn't ask you to do on a take-home exam because it would take 3 weeks to do. Now he can say, listen, do this with ChatGPT. You can still do this take-home
Yeah.
exam over the weekend.
Interesting.
And I think when it comes to workers, I don't know about you, but I use ChatGPT every day, right? Like from everything to social media content to going through a PDF quickly to just riffing on
Yeah.
an idea.
I use it. My confidence in the English language is still. I still feel because I learned it at 26 years old. So I still. It is an amazing tool that is correcting me and all that. But I think this is the beginning.
Yeah.
It's gonna get much better, and you just need to make sure that you use it to help you.
But I think as the younger we go, so into the K-12 beast, so to speak, like the system there is very hard to change, very difficult. But also I think that's where, and again, it's important across the board, but where these large language models, their representation becomes a lot more important.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've ever used Midjourney.
Not yet. I haven't played much with it. I have a friend who's always posting stuff about Midjourney, and it's just unbelievable.
Incredible. Yeah. But try to ask it to do anything about, Arabs or anything in our part of the region. She doesn't get because it just hasn't been trained on that kind of thing.
Not enough data. Not enough.
enough
Yeah.
data.
Yeah.
Like if you ask it about give me, and I've done this, right? Like my wife's Bahraini, so I've done, Manama as painted by Gustav Klimt.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I mean, it'll give you something that looks like a mosque,
Yeah.
but you do Riyadh, you do Jordan, they're all of the same.
Same. Yeah.
But if you do Paris versus Amsterdam, versus
You've got a lot.
very, very clear.
So once again, we're not equal, or there's an inequality even.
It's only the same thing about so I'm just using this as a very clear example. You can apply the same thing to text-based generative AI and similar. And again, so the younger you go also, so for example, in pre-K early, I can see, ChatGPT automating and adding to that teachers' productivity, removing. I think that's great, removing the things that don't count. But we know for a fact, right, infants and toddlers don't learn well from screens and machines. They can't pick up language from a screen. So if you give a 1-year-old a Pokemon to talk to, it's not going to learn because it needs to look at a human face. I mean, again, maybe there'll be advances in robotics that I don't know about. But I say, generally speaking, I think the people that
wasn't the impression I got when I spent a bit of time at Stanford a month ago. I got this thing with these study. There's a study that contradicts the study.
Yeah, I mean, again, the last time I checked, it's really almost impossible to teach really, really young kids language until they're maybe 3 or 4 from non-humans. If you they need to hear humans because, again, there are, like I said, papers and studies on this, because they're also looking at visual cues, they're looking to your mouth. We're obviously, again, this maybe changes over time, but right now our brains evolution has wired us to primarily and almost exclusively respond to other humans. Non-human objects, there are very clear studies where even at 3 or 4 days old, fMRI machines, you can see that where are the kid's eyes trying to look, or what parts, what parts of the brain are lighting up.
Wow.
Again, I'm butchering, I'm sure, assuming the science, but there's a lot there that makes it very clear that the human factor, the younger you are, is so much more important.
2 more claims, and then I have one final question, and this has taken us to the end of this amazing conversation. One is, I had a teacher that changed, in my view, my life. Sam claims that we can have that experience with AI. And then the last claim also that I want to hear I want to hear on this, are we really going to be able to replace this amazing human that plays a role, an influence on us with an AI, and then you can have an amazing AI for each learning you're having, math or language, and then the last one is more related to the human existence in this world. He's comparing AI as potentially as dangerous as a nuclear war or pandemic, and hence why the regulation.
Yeah, I mean, let's say, so to start with the last one, again, I don't think I'm smart enough to comment on artificial general intelligence. Like, for me, my notion of, from philosophical perspective, that requires some sort of sentience. But again, I don't know enough about it, but I understand a lot of the concerns, that the AI movement talks about in terms of alignment.
Yeah.
How do you make sure, even if it's not artificial general intelligence, how do you make sure that it actually understands and aligns with the prompt generator, which is the human, that in achieving this task, it doesn't, I don't know, kill half of humanity.
Yeah.
I think those are sort of serious concerns. But in terms of, and could be as dangerous as
Mo Gaudat, I don't know if you follow his work. He wrote a book recently called Scary Smart.
Okay.
Very insightful.
Okay.
And
No,
he respond to some of this.
okay. Yeah, no. So again, like, I'm not a machine learning expert. I'm not an AI expert, so I don't think I can comment. But based on sort of my sort of general reading, and again, like the other part about AGI that I think is interesting is what makes us very interesting as humans is the subconscious as much as the conscious.
Yeah.
AI doesn't have a subconscious.
Not yet.
Well, exactly. So when people say not yet, again, I think can we create sentience?
That's the whole book about. I've been following some of his work.
Mo Gaudat.
Mo Gaudat, because he's been with Google. He
Google X.
he claims to know. He claims to be 10 years ahead of us, and he said, guys, they feel. They're not far away from feeling.
So that for me, it also goes into this like existential, philosophical, religious discussion. Like, what is a soul?
Yeah.
Like, can they feel? Can they be sentient without a soul? And if, as humans, we've discovered how to create a soul, what does that mean for faith, belief in general? So, for me, again, I can't claim I know enough about that. On the tutoring side, I think, like I said, I'm more interested in artificial intelligence that's easy for kids to program and teach.
Yeah.
Because that makes their thinking very visible. I think it would be super helpful, again, to have personalized instant feedback on task-based learning. But I think the interesting thing about a human tutor is they also can understand how you feel. They can understand cultural cues and context. Right? Like, a tutor will always be much more effective if they're from your background. If you can also see yourself in them.
Interesting. Very interesting.
And I'm not sure how that's going to be done with AI. I mean, again, like, so
they can create an AI that looks exactly like you, that speak exactly like you.
But the problem is,
always
be a lot more Western, because it's been trained on sort of primarily Western data.
Yeah.
Is it going to understand Arabic sort of context and clues and culture? And also, again, what is that AI going to look like? Is it just going to be behind a screen? Is it a chat age of? Because I think if I'm learning Japanese, it's very, very helpful to chat with an AI bot, because I'm not going to be embarrassed about any mistakes I make. I'm not going to feel like, oh my God, like
someone's judging me.
They think I'm an idiot. like I made the same mistake a million times. So again, I can see the benefits there, but I don't know. And again, there are startups trying this. Like, Character AI is already trying to get everybody to speak to an Einstein, John Rawls.
Wow. No, we don't like to predict much, but I'm still gonna ask you, what's your prediction in the next 5 to 10 years? In specifically education in the region. So maybe the question is a bit of your aspiration versus the reality of.
I'd say I think the metrics that people care about, and obviously that matter from an investment standpoint, and I think will happen. We'll probably in the next 10 years have our first EdTech uniform
in MENA. Wow.
But I'd say my aspiration is more about, and again, these don't have to be VC-backed businesses. And I think this is kind of the risk sometimes. There are a lot of really, really good businesses out there that don't need to be VC backable, don't need to have venture-like returns. That could be really, really important. So my ambition is, I'd say, for more pedagogy-first businesses that solve real problems, starting with the pedagogy, not with the technology. Whether, again, they end up using ChatGPT or developing their own AI algorithm, super important, but less important than what's the actual problem they're solving. So I'm hoping, in the next 10 years, we have a company, and maybe it's already there, like Anab, that is focused on training Arabic-speaking teachers, like Abwab, that is going beyond just instruction and one-directional learning to sort of more project-based learning. Because that's also, I'd say, a lot of what's missing in our part of the world. There's a lot of kind of rote instruction, less platforms where kids can go and explore something new, and I think that will be a big part of the future.
There's a school in Medellin. We just came back from Colombia, and I love that part of the world, by the way, because I experienced something unique in the sense of how do you get a city like Medellin used to be one of the most violent city in the world, and now it's one of the most innovative. and the innovation goes to the decentralization goes even at school level. So they have a benchmark of what they want to achieve, but everyone does it the way they want. And there's a group of schools called Cosmos. Have a look at it.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. I don't know if we can get inspired
Yeah,
by that in the Arab world. I hope you'll be part of the next. I mean, unicorn or real unicorn. That's for me.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a brand. It's important, but at least if we can support more and more impactful startups and founders that are doing this to elevate the region, that would be amazing.
I mean, for me, I think of entrepreneurship as the purest form of ultra project-based pedagogy.
Yeah.
Like you're learning on the job. This is a project. You live and die by how well this project goes, and I think that's a lot more important than what valuation.
Session of making it happen. Yeah.
That's kind of part of the problem in our region is because, and maybe that's where we're playing catch up, because in the US it's all about the unicorns. We're trying to go down this unicorn by committee route.
It's okay if the story is to become a unicorn and it's motivates. Why not?
Yeah, but it's one indicator. It's not the most and again, it's very surface level. I'd rather have a very impactful company, sustainable, good cash flows, etc. Than they got $1 billion valuation. Because it's very easy to massage the numbers to get $1 billion valuation.
I don't remember which Chinese leader said, I don't care if the cat is white or black. I just wanted to catch mice. So we just want people to make it happen.
Exactly. Thank you so much for giving me this platform. Really, really enjoyed it. Covered a lot, and hopefully we can have more of these discussions.
I mean, we can revisit what we've talked about. So, okay, maybe we need to zoom in and out in a specific... it's a pleasure.